Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am the goddess of radical self-love, and this is MECA, Make Everyone Count Always. We are a support network for radical self-love and self-care and master manifesting the life you desire and deserve. Thank you all to our returning family members and all those who are new. Please select the subscription button and ring the bell. Thumbs up. So our community here at MECA values and supports our community's most vulnerable care receivers and those who care for them caregivers. When our community's most vulnerable and those who care for them feel valued and supported, the rest of us are assured we are valued and supported as well. Today is Transcendence Thursday, and we are on the second portion of cognition of being in the peak experience. So yes, we're on our second session of this, and as you guys know who have been listening for a while, I first should say we utilize my boyfriend Maslow's work on our Self-Transcendence Thursday, because when we understand what motivational factors need to be satisfied in order to move up the chain of needs, deficiency needs to growth needs, and then up, we have to be sure we are stable and balanced in every area. And my boyfriend helps us do that. So we are going to, I drew a card for us already from Joseph Campbell, and Follow Your Bliss. So it's not available in stores anymore, but you can find it online. So we got metaphysical, the external principle which never was born, never will die. It is in all things, it is in you now. You are a wave on the face of the ocean. When the wave is gone, is the water gone? Has anything happened? Nothing has happened. It is a play, a game, a dance. Beautiful, beautiful. I'm really sorry. I am not feeling well right now, but I am just putting one foot instead of the other. So, while I'm doing this, I am in pain. I don't know what else I'd be doing. Just kidding. So, section 2. I wanted to also tell you that this is my second to the last day of the free version of YouTube, because I will be having videos on our iBotme channel. If you would like to become a member for free, so you can be one of our little testing guinea pigs to make sure the site is running the way we would like, smooth and whatnot, you can email me at goddess.ibodme, so IBODME @gmail.com, and I will send you everything, or the CEO will send you everything you need. And then obviously you still get a follow without paying for the videos. So while it is true that all human perception is a product of the human being and is his creation to an extent, we can yet make some different, every time I always know when I'm going to screw things up, differentiations between the perception of external objects as relevant to human concerns and as irrelevant to human concerns. They are and are not. right? External objects. It's how we see and understand the external world, obviously. Self-actualizing people are more able to perceive the world as if it were independent not only of them, but also of human beings in general. See the world as if it were independent. This also tends to be true of the average human being in the highest moments, i.e., in his peak experiences. He can then more readily look upon nature as if it were there in itself and for itself, not simply as if it were a human playground put there for human purposes. He can more easily refrain from projecting human purposes upon it. In a word, he can see it in its own being, endless, rather than as something to be used or something to be afraid of or to be reacted to in some other human way. It's kind of funny because there's this poem about, I don't remember who wrote it, about a boy who gazes into the pond, or whoever it was, maybe it was a girl, and they see their own reflection, and the pond or whatnot, like that body of water, sees its own reflection, right, in the child's eyes. I think it was a child. Who knows? Doesn't matter. The whole deal is the boy or girl, is whoever the person is looking into the body of water at their reflection, just like the body of water is looking in their eyes at their own reflection, the body of water's reflection. And this just reminds me of that, you know, how do we know what the water is thinking? And do we even think about that, right? Is it possible? As one example, let us take the microscope, which can reveal through histological slides either a world of per se beauty or else a world of threat, danger, and pathology. A section of cancer through a microscope, if only we can forget that it is cancer, can be seen as a beautiful and intricate and awe-inspiring organization. A mosquito is a wondrous object if seen as an end in itself. Viruses under the electron microscope are fascinating objects, or at least they can be if only we can forget their human relevance. B-Cognition, because it makes human irrelevance more possible, enables us thereby to see more truly the nature of the object in itself. B-Cognition, being cognition, remember, if you listen to the rest of the chapters, being cognition to me is loving cognition. So you can love the world outside of yourself in and of itself, right? B-Cognition, because it makes human irrelevance more possible, enables us thereby to see more truly the nature of the object in itself. 4. One difference between B-Cognition and average cognition, which is now emerging in my studies, but of which I am as yet uncertain, is that repeated B-Cognitizing seems to make the perception richer. The repeated, fascinated experiencing of a face that we love or a painting that we admire makes us like it more and permits us to see more and more of it in various senses. This we may call intra-object richness. But this, so far, contracts rather sharply with the more usual effects of repeated experiencing, i.e., boredom, familiarization, effects, loss of attention, and the like. I have found to my own satisfaction, although I cannot yet prove it, that repeated exposures to what I consider a good painting will make the painting look more beautiful to people pre-selected as perceptive and sensitive, while repeated exposures to what I consider a bad painting will make it look less beautiful. The same is true for women or men. You know, someone rubs you the wrong way, right? And the more you're around them, the more they rub you the wrong way, and vice versa, right? You love somebody's company, and every time you see them, you love it more, and can't get enough. In this more usual kind of perception, where so frequently the initial perception is simply a classification into usefulness or not useful, dangerous or not dangerous, repeated looking makes it become more and more empty, right? So, right when you are introduced to something or someone, if you're watching where your mind goes, hopefully you're not pre-selecting them as useful or not useful. You know, I guess it depends on what the circumstances are at times, right? Because if you're like out networking, you're definitely going to be asking, you know, is this person that I'm meeting with going to be useful to either introducing me to someone or being a part, because you're there for a reason, right? So I mean, we do it all the time. Like, let's say we're out and we meet somebody who's super fun, you know, and you're like, they're useful for, right, having fun, they're awesome to hang out with. So we do it all the time, or they're not. The task of normal perception, which is so frequently anxiety-based or demotivation determined, deficiency need motivation determined, is fulfilled in the first viewing. So if you have deficiency needs that you still need to fulfill in your physiological needs, your safety and security, your love and belonging, right, and your lower level ego needs, then you definitely will be predetermining on the initial meeting whether or not a person is useful to you constantly, right, or a thing or a event, whatever, wherever they fit into those deficiency needs. The task of normal perception, which is so frequently anxiety-based or demotivation determined, is fulfilled in the first viewing. Need to perceive then disappears, and therefore after, the object or person, now that it has been cataloged, is simply no longer perceived. Poverty shows up in repeated experiencing. So also does richness. Furthermore, not only does poverty of the percept show up in repeated looking, but also the poverty of the beholder. And we can change that, right, by master manifesting, right, and knowing, like, recognizing fear when it's there. Recognizing those feelings of lack mentality so that we can transmute those energies into the energies that will draw near to us what it is that we desire and deserve out of our lives. One of the main mechanisms by which love produces a profounder perception of the intrinsic qualities of the love object than does non-love is that love involves fascination with the love object, and therefore repeated and intent and searching, looking, seeing with care. Lovers can see potentialities in each other that other people are blind to. Customarily, we say love is blind. But we must now make room for the possibility that love may be, under certain circumstances, more perceptive than non-love. Of course, this implies that it is possible in some sense to perceive potentialities which are not yet actual. I'll say it when I'm done. This is not as difficult a research problem as it sounds. The Rorschach test in the hands of an expert is also a perception of potentialities which are not yet actualized. I don't know how to say it. Rorschach. So this is a testable hypothesis in principle. I need to write it down because I need to look at it again. I know I've taken it, but I just need to check out a couple of things. So sorry, so sorry, so sorry, so sorry. All right, I'm back. Just kidding. 5. American psychology, or more broadly, Western psychology, in what I consider to be an ethnocentric don't mind me, way assumes that human needs, fears, and interests must always be determinants of perception. The new look in perception is based upon the assumption that cognition must always be motivated. This is also the classic Freudian view. The further assumption is implied that cognition is a coping, instrumental mechanism, and that it must, to some extent, be egocentric. It assumes that the world can be seen only from the vantage point of the interest of the perceiver, and that the experience must be organized around the ego as a centering and determining point. I consider this point of view ethnocentric not only because it arises so clearly as an unconscious expression of the Western world outlook, but also because it involves a persistent and audacious neglect of the writings of philosophers, theologians, and psychologists of the Eastern world, particularly of the Chinese, Japanese, and Hindus, not to mention writers like Goldstein, Murphy, Buehler, Huxley, Sorkin, Engel, and many others. My findings indicate that in the normal perceptions of self-actualizing people and in the more occasional peak experiences of average people, perception can be relatively ego-transcending. So, normal perceptions and more occasional peak experiences of average people, right? So those magic moments that change your life. Perception can be relatively ego-transcending, right? Self-transcendence Thursday. That's what we're talking about. How to get there a lot more often. So, self-transcending, self-forgetful, egoless. It can be unmotivated, impersonal, desireless, unselfish, not needing, detached. It can be object-centered rather than ego-centered. That is to say that the perceptual experience can be organized around the object as a centering point rather than being based upon the ego. It's kind of like thinking like that world revolves around you, right? Or does the world revolve? Remember, like, what is it? I mean, before we knew too much about our outside world and how everything works, like astrology wise, right? Astrologically. And we thought we were the center of the universe, that Earth was, and everything rotated around us, right? Same difference. So, that is to say that the perceptual experience can be organized around the objects as the centering point rather than being based upon the ego. It is as if they were perceiving something that had an independent reality of its own and was not dependent upon the beholder. It is possible in that aesthetic experience or the love experience to become so absorbed and poured into the object that the self is in a very real sense disappears. Well, we know this is true with people. It's called codependency. I know that's not what he's talking about, but I mean, poured so into something, I would say greater than the self is more about what we're looking for, right? A higher cause, not built around the ego, right? If you're talking about one other person, it's more built around your ego, right? Some writers on aesthetics, mysticism, on motherhood, and on love, e.g. Sorgen, have gone so far as to say that in the peak experience, we may even speak of identification of the perceiver and the perceived, a fusion of what was two into a new and larger whole, a superordinate unit. If you're coming together and you're two non-codependent people who are supportive and of each other's growth needs, then I say, yes, you may merge. Although, before you merge as those, first you must merge within yourself with the divine feminine and divine masculine, and being balanced in that, being able to experience and express yourself on both of those levels, right? Both the feelings and emotions and also strength and wisdom, right? All those things together. Intuition and knowing, with courage and values or virtues, complete in yourself first. This could remind us of some of the definitions of empathy and of identification, and of course opens us up to the possibilities of research in this direction. Well, yes, as an empath, you can definitely feel what another is feeling. But it's not only about feeling it, it has to be about transmuting that energy, right? So transmuting it or releasing it to the ether, right? Six, the peak experience is felt as a self-validating, self-justifying moment which carries its own intrinsic value within it. That is to say, it is an end in itself, what we may call an end experience rather than a means experience. It is felt to be so valuable an experience, so great of a revelation, that even to attempt to justify it takes away from its dignity and worth. This is the universally attested to by my subjects as they report their love experiences, their mystic experiences, their aesthetic experiences, their creative experiences, and their bursts of insight, particularly with the with the moment of insight in the therapeutic situation does this become obvious, by virtue of the very fact that the person defends himself against the insight. It is therefore, by definition, painful to accept. Its breaking through into consciousness is something crushing to the person. And yet, in spite of this fact, it is universally reported to be worthwhile, desirable, and wanted in the long run. Seeing is better than being blind, even when seeing hurts. Facing truth. I think that's why truth is always what I'm chasing, right? It is a case in which the intrinsic self-justifying, self-validating worth of the experience makes the pain worthwhile. Numerous writers on aesthetics, religion, creativeness, and love uniformly describe these experiences not only as valuable intrinsically, but also so valuable that they make life worthwhile by their occasional occurrence. The mystics have always affirmed this great value of the great mystic experience, which may come only 2 or 3 times in a lifetime. I would say for myself, some of these experiences, mystical experiences, have come after the most devastating times of my life. It's about trading having your heart break in such a painful way that the only thing that comes out of it is wisdom. It's ultimately the only point. Sorry. The contract is very sharp with the ordinary experiences of life, especially in the West, and most especially for American psychologists. Sorry. Some of the reason I'm so connected to Maslow is because it's like he's in some way for me. And the experiences I've had, that I haven't been or hadn't been able to find any real, I wouldn't say meaning, but it was like nobody else could really grasp in full detail all of the things that I had witnessed and all, even the pain, right? Even the painful experiences he talks about so often, and different, like the choices that we have to make, and why at times in our lives we are unable to do the things that we want and make the correct decisions, right? And the correct choices, because we have needs that haven't even been fulfilled yet. And so for when I started really studying this, it was like I started seeing where throughout my life where there were holes, big gaping holes, that I had no control over when I was so young. But the reasons that I see that they were there was to build some of the things that are in the hierarchy of the theory, right? And so at some point in my life, it's easier, obviously, to build it from bottom up. But for some of us, right, lone wolves, or those who have been through, well, I don't know how many people exactly have been through the exact same things as me, obviously, so I had to figure things out from a really young age, all the time. So for me, it was like I had things in the hierarchy in the top hierarchy starting to be checked off, but I really had to understand morals and values more than anything. That was the big thing for me. Just 1 second. So, because of all of the dehumanizing situations I had gone through, but from all the experiences, right, it's like I was able to really grasp beauty, because I had seen such ugly things. So it's all about how far that pendulum swings, right? And if it swings way out this way, right, it has to meet the further swing on the other side. It's universal law. And it took me a long time to understand it. And I do now. It's pretty incredible, the gifts that I was given out of what I thought were so devastating, that would like separate me so greatly from the rest of the world in so many ways, over and over. But for every time that I felt that separation over and over from the world, right, because of these devastating things, there has to be another side to it, right? The way you experience moments in the world when you're just experiencing things differently once you understand the pendulum. And I think he does the best job of explaining that and how to see that, especially when you found your strength so early. So the contrast is very sharp with the ordinary experiences of life, especially in the West, and most especially for American psychologists. Behavior is so identified with means to ends that by many writers, the words behavior and instrumental behavior are taken as synonymous. Everything is done for the sake of some further goal in order to achieve something else. The hypothesis of this attitude is reached by John Dewey in his theory of value, in which he finds no ends at all, but only means to ends. Even this statement is not quite accurate because it implies the existence of ends. Rather, to be quite accurate, he implies that means are means to other means, which in turn are means, and so on ad infinitum. The peak experiences of pure delight are for my subjects among the ultimate goals of living, and the ultimate validations and justifications for it. That the psychologist should bypass them, or even be officially unaware of their existence, or what is even worse, in the objectivistic psychologies deny a priority the possibility of their existence as objects for scientific study, is incomprehensible. Really wanted to get through this, and well, I guess I'll be able to do some tomorrow, but I really wanted to get through the whole chapter, and I know we won't be able to. Yeah, it's super long. Oh, I don't know what to do. I guess this is just the way it's gonna work. So I'll read as much as I can tomorrow, and then, well, pretty much we're going to start over, but you guys will know everything if you come over. When you come over, not yet. So, I'm sorry about that. I don't know. I think it is really important. I mean, I'm not sorry about it. I don't know why I always say I'm sorry. I think it's important for people to understand. Once you understand where you're at and then where you want to go, it's a lot easier to make that path, the map, right? I mean, the direction, whatever. And, you know, for me, when I started working with Maslow, I had no idea. I mean, it was like, oh, well, that is so weird because I'm doing all these things over here and it matches, and like, why don't I just make a care plan using this and all these things, right? I was being told to do. And then it's so interesting where it's all led. Like, I can't believe in some ways, like, it's all led to creating this assessment that, and then a company that will help people find love. And it really did, to be honest, all stem from Mass. My boyfriend. I literally turned into the goddess of radical self-love because I used everything I learned from him. I mean, lots of other people, obviously, but I mean, it was the way I could really chart where I was at and what I needed to keep going. You know, I needed 3 years ago when I started all this, I needed a home. I needed to know how I was going to get me and my kids food and water and just all our basic needs. And, you know, then it went up from there. So it's like knowing that I am stable in all those areas means that I'm able to work and create the work, create what it is that is in my head. I can now create it in the 3D because I have satisfied my deficiency needs, right? So, but each one of us are different, so some of us are more inclined to the growth needs once we have the deficiencies fulfilled, which it doesn't, like I've said before, make anybody better or worse, because some people can just be happy with just having their physiological needs fulfilled, you know, like, I mean, physiological, safety, security, love and belonging. You know, I would say the deficiency needs is more about what I'm talking about in there, and some are more pulled at different levels. Like some are more pulled towards the root deficiency needs just being satisfied, and they're good there because they're driven out of fear. And then, you know, the safety and security, it's more about pleasure in that whole area. And once you're fulfilled in the pleasure area and you're balanced, meaning that you're not overdoing it in one area or another, right? Because some people really get stuck there with addictions. We all have addictions, but some of them dictate our lives, right? Like, I have a work addiction. And then then, you know, one level up is community and belonging, and for some, they excel from getting that outside attention. That's what ignites their and fulfills how they feel about themselves. You know, like, is it always, it still needs to be balanced. So even if you're there and that's where you're driven out of, right? That's where your motivations are. They still need to be balanced, or else you're not going to be fulfilled within yourself. So it's more about, on each one of those levels, finding the balance, right? So even if there's not on top of that growth needs for like creating and education and all these, you know, philanthropy, like humanitarianism, like doing the extras over and above, right? It doesn't mean anybody who is doing that is better than the people who feel fulfilled just by having their basic needs met. So even though he's putting it into the terms he does, Maslow, it doesn't mean that there's not room for us to be creative with his work and turn it into whatever it is that we need it to do for us, because, well, that's how good it is. So I love you all so much. I'm sorry about my it's allergies too. If I start crying, it's just gonna make my nose keep running. So we'll be back tomorrow for Freaky Friday, our last Freaky Friday. And I really will show you my painting finally. So I promise 100%. And yeah, I love you all. So, oneness, thanks for spending this time with me. Ciao, ciao for now.